is and how it manifests. What's happened is that this debate has been very narrow and destructive. What stakeholders have said is racially biased policing is all about racism and that these are bad people. And it's very understandable that police hearing this message that racially biased policing is all about racist bad cops would be totally defensive and being felt like it was an affront to have this kind of challenge. What I think police and community stakeholders need to understand is that racially biased policing can be committed by the best police officer because he's human, and departments are going to have racially biased policing because they hire human beings. And I say that because of the voluminous social psychological research that's been looking at racial bias in this country the last 5 decades. And one of the things they've come up with that I think is most potent to this discussion is this very strong link in many of our minds who live in the U.S. between people of color and crime. Many people in this country see crime in people of color. And some of the interesting findings are these. One, now, as opposed to maybe historically, it has gone underground. They find this to occur at a below conscious level. And I'm going to talk to you in a minute about some of the laboratory studies they have done to try to test how we think without thinking very quickly. And what they have found, as I said, is a very strong link between people of color and crime. What's also very important to understand is that they have found this even in people who want to be tolerant and non-prejudiced, profess to be tolerant and non-prejudiced, on a paper and pencil test are shown to be non-prejudiced. It's almost like there is a war going on between our conscious beliefs and the way we want to be and our think without thinking, blink response. And if you read the book Blink, he talks about thinking without thinking and how we come to very quick kinds of conclusions. So let me give you an example of just one of the studies, and these studies have been conducted by Harvard researchers, Stanford, University of Pennsylvania. Picture subjects sitting before a computer screen, and they are told you are going to see people, and these people are either going to have a gun in their hand or a neutral object. If they have a gun in their hand, hit this key for shoot. If it's a neutral object, hit this key for don't shoot. And as you can guess, they are changing the color of the person holding this object. And then the social psychologists measure how long it takes to respond, and these people are supposed to act very quickly. We're talking about milliseconds that they're measuring. And then they're measuring the errors that occur. So what do we find? Across all demographic groups as subjects, in terms of response time, they are more quick to shoot the black with a gun, and it takes them longer to shoot the white with a gun. In terms of errors, what we find is they erroneously shoot the black without a gun. They erroneously fail to shoot the white who has a gun. And what the social psychologists tell us is this is really a measure of this blink response in our head, this race crime blink response. Again, at an underconscious level and also in people who profess tolerance. So back to internal affairs. What relevance does this have, for instance, to internal affairs units across the country? On the one hand, I think it's quite relevant because I think we need this broader understanding of racially biased policing to understand that it does exist. And before we send IA investigators out to look for something, they need to understand that it exists. I also would hope that by this broader understanding that good people can commit racial bias, it will reduce defensiveness, and these officers, it could promote that interaction with the complainant, have a more sympathetic interaction as a result of a broader understanding of racial bias. On the other hand, this understanding that even good people can commit racially biased policing also leads us to the understanding that complaint review has a limited role in broader efforts to produce racially biased policing. And I want to talk about that broader role, but before I do, I want to address, again in this context of maximizing the complaint review potential, Commander Webb's suggestion regarding using ACR for racial profiling complaints. I was giving one of my command staff training that Commander Webb mentioned in Orlando 2 years ago. I had a nice mix of sworn command staff from across the country and civilian monitors from NACOL and other types of agencies. And one of the deputy chiefs said, "We take racial profiling complaints so seriously, we're processing them all through IA." And the civilian monitor said, we take racial profiling complaints so seriously, we're trying to divert them to mediation. Under IA, we have 0 sustained complaints, 0 accountability, and 0 citizen satisfaction. They have better results using the mediation process. So I do support that recommendation that you consider the ACR for racial profiling complaints. But let me go back to my final point, which is how do we think about complaint review in the context of what I would call a comprehensive agency program to promote fair and impartial policing. It's not all about complaint review. And we need to think about ways to promote good behavior. And it's consistent with the LAPD movement away from the reliance on discipline, consistent with the think strategy before penalty motif on. So a comprehensive program has various components to it. One of them is policy. An agency needs to have a strong policy that indicates when officers can and cannot use race and ethnicity to make law enforcement decisions. LAPD has a very strong policy, one of the most restrictive in terms of when race and ethnicity can be used. I think training is critically important. Your recruit training, actually, you have POST, you might know this, the 4-hour required POST training that was developed by POST in conjunction with the Museum of Tolerance is the best I've seen in the nation. And I've looked far and wide for good training. I have found none except the California training. I do think it can be improved. I'm working with San Francisco to add a module to it that reflects what we've learned from social psychologists about subconscious bias, and I will be sharing that with LAPD to see if there's an interest in that curriculum. The other thing I think is critically important is training of first-line supervisors. And Commander Webb mentioned I have a grant from DOJ and a lot of wise people to help me. Because we all know first-line supervision is key to quality behavior on the streets. And yet we need to tell our first-line supervisors in the realm of racial profiling, what are you looking for? And what do you do when you find it? Because again, it's not all about bad police. It might be about well-meaning police. It's not all about discipline. It's promoting good behavior. So we are developing that curriculum. I've already had some interest from Chief Perez and Chief MacArthur in terms of looking at that curriculum when it is developed. So that's training. Another component of a comprehensive program is broadly supervision, leadership, accountability. This includes everything from the message from the top on down in terms of racially biased policing, and then also how an agency can use their standard accountability mechanisms to promote fair and impartial policing along with all the other quality, professional, democratic policing. In LAPD, this is Teams 2. This is personnel evaluations. These are the new cameras, and how can we use those to promote fair and impartial policing? Recruitment and hiring is a very important component of a comprehensive program. This means we have 2 objectives. We want a diverse force that represents the community, and we want to, at the screening stage, select people who can police in an unbiased manner. And again, I see strengths in LAPD. The statistics you have in terms of diversity would be admired by your peers across the nation. And then what Commander Webb shared in terms of some of the things LAPD is doing in the background investigation and the personal interview are strong for trying to determine who can come into this force and police in an unbiased fashion. Other components of a comprehensive program is how you outreach to the diverse communities in the jurisdiction. Data collection, for me, is a cost-benefit analysis on a jurisdiction-by-jurisdiction basis. I think some agencies will decide that data collection is appropriate, and I know LAPD has been doing vehicle stop data collection. For others, it's not as important. So in sum, LAPD has 0 sustained complaints, and as we've heard from the several reports, that is the norm across the nation. And we can understand that when we start to think about what those allegations are and what the challenges are for the investigator. We need to maximize the potential of that complaint review process, but I think it's important to put that process in context